The Indian subcontinent bears deep scars from the partition of 1947. This event, which marked the end of British colonial rule, created two new nations, India and Pakistan. The partition, however, was a bloody and chaotic affair, displacing millions and igniting communal violence that claimed countless lives. And this tragic event sowed the seeds of mistrust and animosity between India and Pakistan, a legacy that continues to haunt their relations today. Despite their shared history and cultural ties, India and Pakistan have been locked in a bitter rivalry for decades. This rivalry is rooted in several factors, including territorial disputes, religious differences, and the unresolved issue of Kashmir. The Kashmir Attack conflict, in particular, has been a major flashpoint between the two nations, leading to several wars and countless skirmishes. Over the years, both countries have sought to resolve their differences through dialogue and diplomacy. However, these efforts have often been derailed by a lack of trust and recurring violence. The two nations have fought three major wars since 1947, and numerous ceasefire agreements have been broken. This cycle of violence and mistrust has had a devastating impact on the region, hindering economic development and fueling social unrest. Pakistan has repeatedly pledged to rein in militant groups operating from its soil, but India remains unconvinced. The presence of these groups, some of which have targeted India in the past, continues to cast a long shadow over bilateral relations. India accuses Pakistan of using these groups as proxies to wage a low-intensity conflict against it, a charge that Pakistan vehemently denies. The issue of trust is central to understanding the complex relationship between India and Pakistan. India argues that Pakistan's history of ceasefire violations, coupled with its reluctance to crack down on militant groups, makes it difficult to trust its promises. Pakistan, on the other hand, accuses India of being intransigent and unwilling to address its concerns. The lack of trust between India and Pakistan has far-reaching consequences. It has hampered efforts to normalize relations, hindered trade and economic cooperation, and fueled an arms race in the region. Moreover, the constant threat of conflict undermines regional stability and poses a serious challenge to international peace and security. The first war between India and Pakistan erupted just a year after independence in 1948. The conflict centered around the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, which was claimed by both countries. The war ended in 1949 with the signing of the Karachi Agreement, which established a ceasefire line and called for a plebiscite to determine the will of the Kashmiri people. The 1949 ceasefire, however, did little to resolve the underlying issues between India and Pakistan. The plebiscite, which was a key provision of the agreement, was never held, leaving the status of Kashmir unresolved. This unresolved issue continued to fester, poisoning relations between the two countries and laying the groundwork for future conflicts. The ceasefire also established a precedent of mistrust between the two nations. Pakistan accused India of reneging on its promise to hold a plebiscite, while India argued that Pakistan had failed to create conditions conducive for a fair and impartial vote. This mutual suspicion and lack of trust became deeply ingrained in the psyche of both nations, shaping their interactions for decades to come. The partition of India and Pakistan was a traumatic event that left a deep scar on the subcontinent. The hasty and poorly planned division led to widespread violence and displacement, creating a legacy of bitterness and resentment that continues to affect relations between the two countries. The partition also left several key issues unresolved, including the status of Kashmir, the sharing of river waters, and the demarcation of borders. These unresolved issues have been a constant source of tension and conflict between India and Pakistan, hindering efforts to build a peaceful and cooperative relationship. The territorial disputes between India and Pakistan are particularly contentious. Both countries claim the entire region of Kashmir, and their armies remain locked in a tense standoff along the line of control which divides the region. This volatile situation has led to numerous military confrontations and ceasefire violations, further escalating tensions. The risk of a nuclear confrontation, while remote, cannot be ignored, making it imperative for both countries to find a peaceful and lasting solution to the dispute. The fragile peace between India and Pakistan shattered once again in 1965, just 17 years after the First Kashmir War. This time the conflict was sparked by a dispute over the run of Kutch, a desolate salt marsh bordering both nations. Pakistan launched Operation Gibraltar, infiltrating troops into Indian-administered Kashmir, hoping to incite a local uprising against Indian rule. India responded with a full-fledged military offensive, crossing the international border and threatening the Pakistani city of Lahore. The conflict escalated rapidly, with both sides deploying tanks, artillery and fighter aircraft in a series of intense battles. The war raged for 5 weeks with heavy casualties on both sides, but neither army could achieve a decisive victory. The international community, fearing a wider escalation, intervened diplomatically, urging both sides to cease hostilities. The Soviet Union, under Premier Alexei Kosygin, played a key role in mediating a ceasefire. The war ended with the Tashkent Declaration, which called for a return to pre-war positions and a commitment to resolving disputes through peaceful means. Despite the agreement, the 1965 war had a profound impact on India-Pakistan relations. It solidified the existing mistrust between the two countries and fueled an arms race in the region. The war also demonstrated the futility of trying to resolve their differences through military force, yet it did little to address the underlying causes of the conflict. I don't ever slow up, no, I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. The most decisive conflict between India and Pakistan occurred in 1971 against the backdrop of a brutal civil war in East Pakistan, which is present-day Bangladesh. The Pakistan army, dominated by West Pakistani officers, launched a brutal crackdown on the Bengali population in East Pakistan, who were demanding greater autonomy and recognition of their linguistic and cultural identity. Millions of refugees fled the violence, seeking refuge in neighboring India. India, already sympathetic to the Bengali cause, provided support to the Mukti Bahini, a guerrilla force fighting for the liberation of East Pakistan. As the humanitarian crisis escalated and the conflict spilled over into its territory, India felt compelled to intervene militarily. The 1971 war was markedly different from the previous conflicts. India's military, better prepared and strategically positioned, swiftly defeated Pakistani forces on both the eastern and western fronts. Within a span of just 13 days, Pakistan surrendered in Dhaka, the capital of East Pakistan, leading to the birth of a new nation, Bangladesh. The 1971 war had far-reaching consequences for the Indian subcontinent. It resulted in the dismemberment of Pakistan and the emergence of Bangladesh as an independent nation. The war also significantly altered the balance of power in South Asia, with India emerging as the dominant military power in the region. Section 3. Aftermath and Implications, the Lingering Scars of War. The 1971 war had a profound impact on India-Pakistan relations, shaping their interactions for decades to come. While the war brought an end to the immediate conflict, it did little to resolve the deep-seated mistrust and animosity between the two nations. In fact, the war left behind a legacy of bitterness and resentment that continues to haunt the region today. For Pakistan, the defeat in 1971 was a national humiliation, a stark reminder of their vulnerability in the unresolved question of Kashmir. The loss of East Pakistan, coupled with the surrender of over 90,000 Pakistani soldiers, fueled a deep sense of resentment and a desire for revenge within certain quarters of Pakistani society. India, on the other hand, emerged from the war with a sense of vindication and military superiority. The victory reinforced India's perception of Pakistan as an aggressor and further solidified its claim over Kashmir. However, the war also brought to the fore the challenges of managing a complex and volatile region. The 1971 war also had significant geopolitical implications. The United States, a long-standing ally of Pakistan, found itself on the opposing side of the conflict, supporting Pakistan while India received support from the Soviet Union. This cemented the Cold War rivalry playing out in South Asia and further complicated relations between the key players. Section 4. The perpetuation of mistrust, ceasefire violations and the erosion of trust. Despite multiple wars and numerous attempts at diplomacy, the trust deficit between India and Pakistan has only deepened over time. The line of control in Kashmir, meant to be a temporary ceasefire line, has become one of the most heavily militarized borders in the world, a constant reminder of the unresolved issues and simmering tensions between the two nations. Ceasefire violations have become a regular occurrence along the line of control, with both sides accusing each other of unprovoked firing and cross-border infiltration. These violations, often resulting in civilian casualties and heightened tensions, further erode the fragile peace and make any meaningful dialogue nearly impossible. Adding to the mistrust is the issue of cross-border terrorism. India accuses Pakistan of providing safe havens to terrorist groups operating from its soil and using them as proxies to carry out attacks within India. Pakistan, while denying these allegations, has failed to take concrete action against these groups, further fueling India's mistrust. The lack of trust between India and Pakistan has far-reaching consequences for the region. It prevents any meaningful cooperation on critical issues such as trade, water sharing, and combating terrorism. It also fuels an arms race, diverting precious resources away from development and perpetuating a climate of fear and insecurity. Section 1. Intrusions and Escalation, the Kargil Infiltration. In the spring of 1999, the world watched with bated breath as tensions between India and Pakistan escalated to a fever pitch in the icy heights of Kargil. This remote and inhospitable region, marked by towering peaks and treacherous glaciers, became the battleground for a conflict that shook the very foundations of India-Pakistan relations. The conflict began with a stealthy and calculated move by Pakistan. Pakistani troops, disguised as Kashmiri militants, infiltrated across the line of control, occupying strategic positions in the Kargil sector. These intrusions were part of a larger plan codenamed Operation Bardar, aimed at severing the vital Srinagar-Leh highway and isolating Indian-administered Ladakh. India, initially caught off guard by the scale and audacity of the intrusion, responded swiftly, launching Operation Vijay, a determined effort to evict the Pakistani forces from their entrenched positions. What followed was a grueling and high-altitude conflict, fought in some of the most challenging terrain on Earth. The Kargil conflict was a stark reminder of the deep mistrust that plagued India-Pakistan relations. Coming just 2 years after both countries had conducted nuclear tests, the conflict raised fears of a wider escalation and the terrifying prospect of a nuclear confrontation.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play
Operation Vijay, India's response to the Kargil intrusions, was a testament to the courage, resilience and tactical acumen of the Indian armed forces. Facing a determined enemy entrenched in well-fortified positions at high altitudes, the Indian Army, supported by the Indian Air Force, launched a multi-pronged offensive to reclaim its territory. The fighting in Kargil was characterized by its ferocity and the challenges posed by the unforgiving terrain. Indian soldiers, often outnumbered and outgunned, fought with unwavering determination, scaling sheer cliffs and braving enemy fire to dislodge the intruders. The Indian Air Force, operating under strict rules of engagement to avoid escalation, played a crucial role in providing close air support and interdicting Pakistani supply lines. The Battle of Tolaling, the Battle of Tiger Hill, and the Battle of Point 4875, later renamed Batra Top in honor of Captain Bakram Batra, who posthumously received the Paramveer Chakra, stand out as defining moments of the conflict, showcasing the indomitable spirit of the Indian soldier. As the conflict raged on, international pressure mounted on Pakistan to withdraw its forces from the Indian side of the line of control. The United States, under President Bill Clinton, played a key role in defusing the crisis, urging Pakistan to de-escalate the situation.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna
The Kargil conflict, though lasting for just over 2 months, had a profound and lasting impact on India-Pakistan relations. It marked a watershed moment, exposing the fragility of peace in the region and the deep mistrust that continues to plague bilateral ties. For India, the victory in Kargil came at a heavy cost, with over 500 soldiers making the ultimate sacrifice. The conflict solidified India's resolve to never again allow a repeat of such an intrusion, and led to the strengthening of its defences along the line of control. The Kargil conflict also had significant domestic political ramifications for Pakistan. The Pakistani army, which had initially denied any involvement in the intrusion, faced severe criticism for its handling of the conflict. The military's misadventure in Kargil further tarnished its image and contributed to the political instability that plagued Pakistan in the years that followed. In the aftermath of Kargil, India adopted a more assertive posture in its dealings with Pakistan, making it clear that it would not hesitate to respond militarily to any future provocations. The conflict also highlighted the need for international pressure on Pakistan to dismantle its terrorist infrastructure and rein in militant groups operating from its soil.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit, I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna
The spectre of cross-border terrorism has cast a long and ominous shadow over India-Pakistan relations, fueling a climate of fear and mistrust that has hampered any meaningful progress towards peace. India has long accused Pakistan of providing safe havens and material support to terrorist groups operating from its soil, using them as proxies to target India and bleed it through 1,000 cuts. These terrorist attacks, often targeting civilians and critical infrastructure, have resulted in the loss of countless innocent lives, leaving behind a trail of devastation and heartbreak. The human cost of cross-border terrorism is immeasurable, measured in the shattered dreams of families torn apart, the lasting scars of trauma, and the pervasive sense of insecurity that pervades daily life. India argues that Pakistan's support for these terrorist groups is part of a deliberate strategy to wage a low-intensity conflict against it, seeking to undermine its stability and economic progress. The porous border between the two countries, coupled with the presence of mountainous terrain and dense forests, provides ample opportunities for infiltration and cross-border movement. Pakistan, while denying any direct involvement in these attacks, has consistently failed to take decisive action against these terrorist groups operating within its territory. This lack of accountability has further fueled India's frustration and mistrust, leading to a dangerous cycle of violence and retribution. The horrific terrorist attacks that unfolded in Mumbai in November 2008 marked a turning point in India's perception of cross-border terrorism emanating from Pakistan. The audacity and scale of the attacks, meticulously planned and executed over 3 days, sent shockwaves across India and the world, exposing the vulnerabilities of a globalized world to the threat of terrorism. For 60 hours, a group of 10 heavily armed terrorists, trained and directed by the Lashkar-e-Taiba, a Pakistan-based terrorist organization, held Mumbai hostage, targeting hotels, a railway station, a Jewish community center, and a cafe frequented by foreigners. The attacks left 166 people dead, including citizens from over a dozen countries, and injured hundreds more. The Mumbai attacks exposed the deep-rooted infrastructure of terrorism operating from Pakistan and the Lashkar-e-Taiba's ability to strike at the heart of India. The attackers, who had infiltrated into India by sea, maintained constant communication with their handlers in Pakistan throughout the siege, receiving instructions and encouragement. The aftermath of the Mumbai attacks saw a surge of anger and outrage in India, with demands for swift and decisive action against those responsible. India shared with Pakistan and the international community irrefutable evidence linking the attacks to individuals and organizations based in Pakistan. The Mumbai attacks proved to be a watershed moment in India's approach to combating cross-border terrorism. The attacks exposed the limitations of India's traditional policy of strategic restraint and led to a paradigm shift in its military doctrine, embracing a more proactive and assertive posture. India, under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, signaled its intent to no longer absorb terrorist attacks passively. The Indian government articulated a new doctrine of offensive defense, reserving the right to respond to terrorist attacks at a time and place of its choosing. In September 2016, India carried out surgical strikes on terrorist launch pads across the line of control in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. These strikes, conducted with precision and speed, targeted terrorist infrastructure and staging areas used for infiltrating terrorists into India. The surgical strikes, while met with denials from Pakistan, sent a strong message that India would no longer tolerate cross-border terrorism and was willing to take preemptive action to protect its interests. The strikes also demonstrated India's growing military capabilities and its resolve to respond to provocations with calibrated force. From defensive defense to cold start, adapting to a new reality. For decades, India's military doctrine was rooted in the concept of defensive defense, a strategy emphasizing large-scale mobilization and a reactive posture in the event of a conflict. This doctrine, shaped by the experiences of the 1962 Sino-Indian War, aimed to deter aggression by posing a credible threat of massive retaliation. However, the Kargil conflict of 1999 exposed the limitations of this approach, highlighting the need for a more proactive and agile military strategy. The slow mobilization time and cumbersome decision-making processes hampered India's initial response to the intrusions in Kargil. In response to the lessons learned from Kargil, India began to rethink its military doctrine, moving away from its traditional emphasis on defensive defense towards a more proactive and offensive-minded approach. This shift was driven by the realization that a purely reactive posture was no longer sufficient to deter aggression or effectively respond to the evolving security challenges in the region. The new doctrine, informally known as Cold Start, aimed to enable India to launch swift and limited offensive operations across the border in response to Pakistani provocations. The goal was to punish and deter Pakistani aggression without risking a full-blown conventional war. Surgical strikes and, beyond, proactive measures against terrorism. The 2008 Mumbai attacks marked a turning point in India's approach to combating terrorism. The scale and audacity of the attacks, carried out by terrorists who had infiltrated from Pakistan, exposed the limitations of India's traditional reactive posture and fueled demands for a more proactive and offensive approach to counter-terrorism. India, under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, signalled its intent to no longer absorb terrorist attacks passively. The Indian government articulated a new doctrine of offensive defence, reserving the right to respond to terrorist attacks at a time and place of its choosing. The Indian Army carried out surgical strikes on terrorist launchpads across the line of control in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir in September 2016. These strikes, conducted with precision and speed, targeted terrorist infrastructure and staging areas used for infiltrating terrorists into India. The surgical strikes, while met with denials from Pakistan, sent a strong message that India would no longer tolerate cross-border terrorism and was willing to take preemptive action to protect its interests. The strikes also demonstrated India's growing military capabilities and its resolve to respond to provocations with calibrated force. A modernization and strategic partnerships, bolstering India's capabilities. India's changing military doctrine has been accompanied by a comprehensive modernization drive aimed at enhancing its military capabilities across all domains: land, air, sea, and cyber. Recognizing the need to stay ahead of the curve in a rapidly evolving security environment, India has embarked on an ambitious program to upgrade its armed forces. India has been investing heavily in acquiring advanced weaponry, including fighter jets, attack helicopters, submarines, and missile defense systems, from countries like France, Russia, the United States, and Israel. In addition to arms purchases, India has also been focusing on indigenous defense production, promoting self-reliance in critical areas. India has also been strengthening its strategic partnerships with like-minded countries, forging closer defense ties with nations like the United States, Japan, Australia, and France. These partnerships involve joint military exercises, intelligence sharing, and technology transfer, enhancing India's interoperability and strategic reach. India's modernization drive and strategic partnerships are not aimed at aggression, but rather at building a credible deterrence capability and ensuring its ability to defend its interests in a volatile and uncertain security environment. A legacy of mistrust, the future of India-Pakistan relations. The troubled history of India and Pakistan is a stark reminder of how deeply entrenched animosity and lack of trust can perpetuate conflict and hinder peace. Despite numerous attempts at dialogue and diplomacy, the core issues that have fueled their rivalry remain unresolved, casting a long shadow over the future of their relationship. India's skepticism towards Pakistan's ceasefire promises stems from a long history of broken agreements, cross-border terrorism, and a perceived lack of sincerity in addressing India's security concerns. The repeated cycle of violence and mistrust has created a deep-seated sense of insecurity and suspicion, making it exceedingly difficult to build lasting peace. While both countries have made overtures towards peace, the path to reconciliation remains fraught with challenges. For any meaningful progress to occur, Pakistan must demonstrate a genuine commitment to dismantling the infrastructure of terrorism operating from its soil and address India's concerns about cross-border infiltration. The future of India-Pakistan relations hinges on their ability to break free from the shackles of their troubled past and engage in a sustained and sincere dialogue based on mutual respect and a shared commitment to peace. Until that happens, the legacy of mistrust will continue to cast a long shadow over the subcontinent, hindering its potential for progress and prosperity.